Kristen, hello, and hello everyone. Happy New Year. That's my first recording this year, and really looking forward to it. The subject for our conversation today, Kristen, is employee survey action. What can companies do to create a meaningful data-powered employee strategy? Really important conversation for the beginning of the year and at all times of the year. And it's so great to be speaking with you, a fellow expert in the employee feedback space.
Thank you, Pavel. I'm really excited to have met you and now to have the opportunity to have this conversation. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, and can you tell a little bit about yourself before we begin?
Sure, thank you. My name is Kristen Myers, and I serve as the Chief Operating Officer at Combined Resource Solutions, a consulting company that was started in 1997 and started primarily in the restaurant space. And now we've expanded to a variety of verticals and serving a variety of industries. And I primarily am responsible for our survey and our listening strategy and helping companies identify what approaches they want to take to hear from their employees and their managers to create better workplaces. So the focus of our organization is to make work better and to help employers and leaders listen to their employees about not only what's really important to them, but what can be changed or modified in their workplace to have a more significant impact and to increase engagement, because we believe that work can be fun and there's a lot of opportunities to increase engagement from our employees, not just through more fun, but more meaningful work and improving development opportunities and all of that, even in the midst of challenging times. And so we've spent many years. I first joined the company in 2005 and left for about 3.5 years around 2011, and have been thrilled to be back over the last 5 years and have really worked on continuing to grow our survey and interview division. So that's what my team does. We do a lot of listening and we help our companies listen to their people as well.
Thank you, Kristen. And as for me, my name is 𝗲𝗺𝗽𝗍𝗍. I am a founder at Business Purpose. I have previously worked as an organizational psychology consultant at IBM, working with over 20 UK and multinational clients on their employee engagement strategy. And in my approach, I really believe that with us spending at least 1/3 of our lives at work, we really want to make sure that we are making the most of the time and that we feel great when we're at work as much as possible, while also focusing on organizational objectives. In my approach, I combine people analytics and my background in working with company data together with bespoke coaching approach to really make sure that we have data-powered solutions that are also taking into consideration the individual differences and needs in the organizations. And Kristen, really looking forward to our conversation today. We've had a few very interesting, very, I think, impactful conversations so far, and I thought it would be interesting for us to record this for our audiences, because we do share the philosophy when it comes to the idea that it's incredibly important for companies to be measuring their employee experience and culture, but also a lot of businesses are making some mistakes, and there's so much more that companies can be doing to really make the most of the survey. And I think one of the bits of our conversation so far that has really stood out for me is the simple fact that while it's important to collect data, just collecting data isn't enough. What do you think? What's your take on the statement?
Sure. I've enjoyed each of our conversations because we both get real excited about this topic and these areas. And, you know, I really enjoy the intersection of people and data. So our organization, you know, all of the surveys that we do are very customized. They're tailored to the employer, variety of employer sizes and different objectives. And one of the things that I always caution our clients, especially as we begin working together, is we don't want to ask any questions that you won't be willing to do something with the answer. I think that's a really important piece. And a survey is a first step. or it's one on a long journey of steps. It's not the end. I think sometimes we have this idea that we're going to complete a survey and then we'll get the results and it's all taken care of. It's really just the beginning. So there are times that people, may be quick to decide on questions or quick to put things out there, but haven't thought about, what are you going to do with the responses? How are you going to share responses with leaders? Often we're working with HR. Maybe it's how would you share those responses with operations? But also, how about with the survey takers? What will you share with them about what the responses were, what trends you saw, and how will you act upon those? And I find, we've talked about this, I'm really passionate about open-ended questions as well, and looking for the themes there. And you can hear so much from employees, whether, we do some pulse surveys, and for us, a pulse survey is, a specific location. So it might just be a place that has 25 employees or 75 employees or 100 employees. And as valuable as their responses are on, our agree, disagree statements, the Likert scale questions, or maybe net promoter score, those types of questions, it's also those open-ended questions. And when I talk to leaders about their responses, they're looking there and they're seeing maybe the same words, right? Repeated. Like, here's some things that are really important to us. And so you have the opportunity to actually listen. And so I love that you say, the employee listening efforts, because if we think of it as just a survey, right, it puts us in a different mindset than actually listening and then responding to what we hear. So those are a few initial thoughts. I know you'll have more to share, and I have a lot to think about with this as well.
Yeah, Kristen, absolutely. You are mentioning several important points there. I think one of them is the fact that just by running an employee survey, just by hiring an employee engagement consultant to do a survey for you, doesn't mean that you are solving the challenges that are related to engagement, such as employee retention, development, the overall happiness, and better employee experience at work. I've seen several companies that think, okay, we've invested money in consultants, in employee engagement survey, we have this platform, we ask questions once a year, a few times a year, nothing happens. Our scores aren't increasing or aren't changing much, nothing's happening. Doesn't mean that our approach is wrong. I've seen quite a bit of articles of opinions on the internet, in the HR and talent management space, saying something like, oh, the employee engagement survey is dead because it doesn't really have an impact, it doesn't change much. But it's still incredibly important to be listening to employees and to getting that high level understanding thanks to data. The thing that doesn't work and why employee survey doesn't work for so many companies out there is that they aren't asking the right questions. They aren't mixing the questions with ways of gathering qualitative data, such as open-ended questions and comments in the survey. They aren't following up on what they're hearing from their people, and therefore people stop believing in the survey. And in this way, running a survey can actually do more harm than good. But it's really not a question of surveys not working. Surveys do work, but you put it very well there, Kristen. It's important to understand that it's just one of the first steps when it comes to listening to employees. It's about the high level, the organizational level, and that's this first step on the journey that helps you to understand which doors to open when it comes to implementing change in your organization and what those doors need to be so that you can have that more focused approach through other interventions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find so often when I'm talking with employers as they're beginning this process, they have their hypotheses about what the results will look like. They, we do a lot of exit interviews. That's another strategy that sometimes we've all read plenty of articles. I even stood up one time at an HR conference and mentioned, oh, I conduct exit interviews, and the speaker basically did a takedown of how terrible it is to do exit interviews. And I thought, oh, okay, maybe I won't speak up next time. But we have so many companies that have continued them for a long time because they want to understand why those people are leaving. There's all this knowledge that's leaving with them. There's investment that the company has made. So there can be a lot of value, again, if you do something with it. So I can point to examples where we've asked the same question for 8 years and haven't seen any change, and others where we ask questions on exit interviews at one point, and a few months later we start to hear something different, and they say the company has changed this. And sure enough, it's tied back to what they're hearing on exit interviews. But where I was headed with that is the idea that, particularly with exit interviews, when we start talking to an employer, a lot of times they'll say, they know why turnover is happening, but they need us as a third party to be able to gather that data. And every now and again, they're right, or they know some pieces, but inevitably, we're hearing things that are completely different than what they expected. And that's why I think sometimes it's really helpful to partner with someone else, because they can suggest questions. It's not just what you think you want to know, but also what are good industry practices in terms of questions. And determining that you are going to, have an open mind a little bit when you see those results, because it can be hard to read that feedback, especially if it is a lot of comments. We do a lot of commentary and in-depth exit interviews when we talk to managers by phone. And so being prepared to hear those results, and to not just get caught up on the number or the score, but really what the people are saying, and allowing that to be uncovered so that you can determine what the next steps will be. So I think that's another recommendation, or something that I've learned is to, you may have your theories about what people will say, but also do your best to leave those to the side, and actually then look at the data and look at the responses and see what people are saying down at a granular level.
Yeah, Kristen, yes, absolutely. It's like, sometimes when we are asking a question, sometimes when a company is asking a question, they think that, okay, we know exactly what it's going to be, what we're going to hear, and maybe it's true, maybe it's not. But it's helpful to bring in a professional like yourself, or like me, to ask some of the questions that are proven to work great based on the years of best practice research. And when you ask those questions, you may uncover something that you didn't even think you should have asked. It's like a question of appreciating the fact that there's some unknown things that you don't realize are out there until you actually have someone to help you ask that question, which may not have even come to your mind. And that's incredibly important. And another thing that's really been standing out for me in my experience with employee surveys is the importance of actually following up on the survey, making sure that you're not just gathering information and understanding what's going on for your people, but also creating plans that are actionable, that can actually be implemented, and that can make a difference for the business, and prove to your people that their voice isn't just listened, but it's also heard to, and that their feedback is being acted upon.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes that planning can include asking more questions. So, often a next step is, if you segment the data, maybe there are particular locations, particular departments, particular tenures, whatever demographics you might use to segment the data, we can then dig a little more deeply into those groups. Sometimes it's through a formal focus group. Sometimes it's conversation, depending on the size of the client or the project. Just like if there's not a high response rate in a particular location, trying to dig into that. We recently conducted 360 surveys for a group of regional managers at a restaurant company. And, a few of the regional managers had a lower participation rate from their management teams. And so I said, okay, well, it's not about finding out who did it and who didn't. Rather, it's just having those conversations and saying, I didn't have as high a response rate as I was hoping. Here's the 2 most important questions to me from the survey. Can you answer these for me? And asking that and showing this survey was important to me. What additional feedback do you have? Or saying out loud, we weren't rated as well as we would like to be on our communication as a group. So we're putting together this task force or this group to determine some additional strategies, or we weren't rated as high as we'd like to, so here's what we're doing. And I think there are a lot of those types of steps that involve including the survey takers, including the employees in the communication process and in the next steps process, because so often the same people that are identifying problems are also identifying resolutions. There are even, we ask often on questions, if you had, 5 minutes with the CEO, what would you tell that person, would make this a better place to work, or a question such as that. So it's forward thinking. It's not, hey, what are the problems? It's what are the solutions, right? What would you like to recommend? And sometimes the recommendations are very straightforward, very consistent, and very good. And so you might actually say, you talked, we listened, here's what we're doing. And I find that that can be extremely helpful to make sure that we're sharing results with the teams and talking about next steps. You don't have to share every single thing that's learned. You don't have to address every comment, of course not, but looking at those overall themes and providing that feedback to the survey takers, I think that's an important action as well. Do you recommend that for your clients, Pavel, that they share the responses? Or maybe not, verbatim, but the themes?
Yeah, indeed, Kristen, that's an important recommendation. You do want to show that you are acting on the feedback, and you want to show, look, here's what we're hearing. That's not just that's your voice out here. It's not just like someone else's from the department that may not be that relevant to what you do. But here's an overview of what people are saying. Do you agree with that? Yes, let's talk about it. No? Or what else would you say? During the action planning stage, it's important to take those extra steps and asking those extra questions, as you say, Kristen, running focus groups, interview with the employees, understanding what's actually going on, making sure that managers know how to work with survey results, not turning it into a finger pointing exercise. Hey, why did someone reply this or that? But actually understanding what's behind that. Do we agree with those results? Does it seem like a fair representation of where the business and our department is at the moment? What can we do with that? Coming back to the idea that survey is that first step when it comes to employee engagement and experience and listening. Survey is helping to open those doors to more powerful, deeper conversations through one-on-one time with funds managers, through team meetings, through focus groups. And it's incredibly important to make sure that people know that business is doing something about with the feedback that they receive, as opposed to just asking questions as a tick box exercise coming from HR. And one thing that's really been on the top of my mind, one of my clients has once mentioned that, okay, so we run our survey, we get pretty good scores, but then we always try to implement the things that are being recommended, and they got pretty good with action planning, using like 2 to 4 points on the action plan, not to overwhelm themselves, but make it actionable. Okay, great. But they say we have so many training sessions, so many initiatives based on the feedback that we receive. But in our latest survey, employees have indicated that they feel we're not doing enough based on this survey. I asked them, well, have you actually told them while implementing those initiatives that you're running them because of the feedback you received during the survey? Oh, no, we haven't thought about it. So quick tip for whoever's listening and is running surveys and post-survey action, make sure that you clearly indicate that there are initiatives and what initiatives those are that you're running because and thanks to your people's feedback.
Absolutely. And I think it has to be repeated, because often if you're the person, responsible within your organization for the survey, it is top of mind for you. Everything you're doing at that time, or when you designate that time, you're really thinking about the survey. But many of the employees and others, this was 5 minutes that they spent 2 months ago, to take your survey, or 10 minutes or something like that. So it's important to continue to share that feedback throughout. If you do a survey once a year, I think several times throughout the year, when you have these newsletters, when you have the big changes. So even 7 months later, you're still talking about it, because that also shows that the feedback really did mean something and it wasn't window dressing. We have a client that we analyze their data. They use their own tool to create the survey and to execute it, and then they hand the data over to us. We do all the analysis and reporting for them. And inevitably, there are a few locations of many, but there are a few where people say, we take the survey every year, it doesn't make a difference, those types of things. And the difference there, not only in their scores, right, but in the sentiment and the comments, because they feel as if, what is the point? And so not surprisingly, their completion rate has dropped every time they've done the survey, as you indicated, because it looks as if it isn't important, or they're more likely to grumble about it too. So showing that tie-in, that same company also has a question on the survey, to your point a moment ago, that says, I am aware of changes as a result of this of previous surveys. And I think that's really helpful. And even if you're a newer employer, or a newer employee, because some of our clients are in higher turnover industries. And so there are people who weren't there for the last survey often. But if you continue to communicate in such a way as you recommended, and I'm recommending as well, continually, hey, as a result of the survey feedback, and we know this is important, we're doing this, then even newer employees, it's like, oh, they actually listen, they pay attention. And where I've seen that to be extremely helpful is at the location level. When it's a group of specific employees. So it's, you're working with these same people every day. It's not at the corporate level. So we have some places where we have like 500 locations. So we'll survey individual locations and the feedback is specific. They get feedback on Pavel, their general manager, Kristen, their assistant manager, and so on, so they're kind of really specific. But some locations, the comments and the sentiment is so similar, and in others, they've seen such real improvements. Another thing I think that's important two other thoughts I had about this in terms of how you respond to the data and then plan for change. One is to don't be upset if people have concerns or complaints if you're asking them for their concerns. So if every time you do the survey, you say, what could be improved, they'll always have something. You're asking them to do that. That's not a criticism. That's feedback, right? It's feedback that you're getting and that would be helpful. And the tone of those comments and the changes, at the beginning, maybe it's treatment at work, or it's, they don't have there's a real disconnect with the culture of the organization, or, some significant, sometimes unfortunately it's harassment and discrimination. I mean, it can be really, really significant, or you can get into places where then those big problems become smaller problems. There will always be opportunities, but if you look at it as, okay, we're asking them for this feedback and now we can continue to improve, but just getting a sense of what their goals are is important. So that's something that I think is important to remember. And the second piece is, you said your client said, they're saying that we haven't done anything with the results, but we do all these things. I don't always like the expression perception is reality, but I think there's a lot of truth there. And I think on a survey, you're measuring perception. You're getting feedback from how those employees feel. So if we ask, you and I both know that development is a huge driver for engagement. But if you provide 50 development tools, but people are still rating development poorly, you can either get angry and say, well, we're providing all these tools, we're paying all this money, what's the problem? Or you can say, okay, where's the disconnect? Why do they think development is poor, but it's something we pride ourselves on? Maybe we're investing in the wrong places, or maybe we're not promoting this enough, or maybe we're not giving our people time, or maybe we're not telling them that it's self-directed and it's their responsibility and opportunity to develop themselves. So I think that's an important component as well, to think about that, even though it can hurt sometimes to see that, or if let's say, 10 people say Kristen's a terrible manager because of this, yeah, that's going to hurt me, but also let me see what they think and why do they think this? Oh, they think I'm too abrupt and I don't spend time with them. Well, I could work on that. Even if I don't have hours and hours a day, but I could connect for a few more minutes. That feedback will help me grow.
Yeah, Kristen, there's so many valuable golden nuggets in what you're saying. especially this idea of like not being upset about the feedback when you're asking for feedback. Of course, it can be quite difficult for everyone to get critical feedback, to get negative feedback,
Yes.
but that's why it's so important. And the fact that survey allows understanding which areas you should look in. It's like, I really like what you said there. It's almost like this little detective story. It's not just looking at the data and the positive and negative things, but you want to understand the impact of the neutral scores. You want to understand the context and the story behind the experience of different demographic groups in your survey and different departments and what's been going on for them, and sort of piecing it together into a coherent narrative of what's going on for your people, and understanding what is it behind the data and what's the story that's actually there behind the comments and the data. It's so much more than just gathering data and looking at a few numbers in the reports. There's so much there to understand and uncover, and that's when it's important to take those additional steps in your action and having more in-depth conversations that are based on the data, but take a step forward from just looking at the data and actually talk about the perceptions and what's going on for people. On this note, Kristin, we've mentioned so many points that I'm sure will be really valuable for our listeners today, but especially now that we're starting new year, a lot of companies will be running the next round of their employee engagement and culture surveys in the next few months. Perhaps for businesses that are just at the beginning of their employee survey efforts, what are some of the quick solutions, advice that you could give to them based on your experience?
One that I think is to look carefully at the questions that you're asking. So sometimes organizations start working with us and they've done a survey themselves, and I'll ask about the origin of certain questions that they're asking. And they're like, oh, well, we've just always asked that, right? And just because we've always asked it doesn't necessarily mean it's a good answer. And then they might push back and say, well, we want to have comparative data. So this may not be the new survey, company you were asking about, but maybe they want to compare. But if the question isn't meaningful, that comparison, whether you're scoring a 4.9 on a 5-point scale or whatever your score might be, if it's not a valuable question, the way the score fluctuates really doesn't matter either. So that comparative data is perhaps not as valuable. We worked with a group that had about 25,000 responses, and it's an organization that has many different owner-operators for different locations. And so, they said, yeah, the feedback from the survey that they had been using for a couple of years is that it's not very actionable. So we blew it up and helped them rewrite a survey. And the tighter questions, working with their advisory council to create those questions and really focus on what's most important and targeted elements, not just perhaps, there's some important questions that contribute to the day-to-day work experience. If you don't have those basic needs met, it's hard to be at a high level of engagement. So for example, scheduling for a lot of hourly employees, that is a very significant concern, and even more so now for many of us in light of coronavirus and all those other things. I think that question is really important and has taken on a lot for some employers. That piece is a very important piece for non-exempt employees. And so, asking those questions and tweaking it, the feedback was so much more positive, not meaning that the survey results were higher, but that the feedback from the people receiving the reports has been so much higher. Like, this I can do something with, right? I can see where my locations that are doing well are the locations that are not doing well. Here is something across the board that we have an area of opportunity. And now we can provide tools to our operators to be able to use those. So I think looking carefully at the questions and determining what you will do with those responses, I think that's really important. Another piece, especially for someone who's maybe starting on the survey journey, is to make sure that the survey takers are understanding why and how the survey will be conducted, and also how the results will be used. Because I'm consistently surprised by people where, we will a lot of times we're texting links to employees to take their survey, or we are, contacting them through email, of course, or we do a lot of telephone interviews and surveys, and people say, wait, what is this about? What's happening? And so we know that we need to work with that employer a little bit better around messaging to explain what this is used for, how the data is it anonymous? Is it not? And thinking through each of those questions is really important. And I think, yes, there's something that you want to Google, or here's some questions, or that you use the internet, but really having, going through those questions of, why are these questions important? Are we asking too many? How long is it going to take people? Of course, that's where working with someone like yourself, an outside consultant can be really helpful, right? But even if you're partnering with just other employers and asking for their feedback, it can be really useful.
Yes, absolutely. And the question of question wording, it may seem like such a simple thing, but it can really have so much impact on the quality of data. Sometimes we can ask questions where we put several questions into a question because we want to find out so much, or questions that cannot be easily understood by all employees. Something that comes to mind. A while ago, I saw a question. My manager walks the talk, which isn't the best survey question, but all right, the client really wanted to use it. But then they say, and we want our survey translated into 20 different languages for all of our locations. Good luck translating an idiomatic expression. Things like that need to be taken into consideration, and just understanding how can a person understand this question when you translate it, where depending on their position, are we talking about internal or external stakeholders, for example, will come in some of the questions. How do you feel about company values? Well, does the person know what the company values are? Do they in their job role need to know that? Are they informed about all of the different things? Are they relevant for them? All those questions need to be looked at to make sure that you're measuring what you want to be measuring. And another really important point is communicating clearly to the employees, not just what's happening with the survey and that the data is anonymous, perhaps it's collected by a third-party provider to ensure that anonymity, but also the fact that it's a continuous process, that there will be steps taken based on the feedback, and they better be taken, otherwise there's not much point in running a survey. And making sure that there are trainings, there are solutions in place for different levels in the organization to really know that their voice is being heard, so that next time when the survey is being run, they are more open to sharing their feedback. Because maybe first survey, it may not be that successful, the response rate may not be that great. If you really show as an organization that that survey really mattered, it can improve. And I've seen companies that would get a big decrease in their survey responses because they haven't acted on the feedback. And I've seen companies that after several years would do amazingly well compared to where they used to be, because they really communicated well. They've learned from some of the challenges, mistakes, and they continuously communicated their commitment to acting on the feedback from their people.
That's right. And I think that having the right steps in preparation is extremely important. One thing, though, I would also caution against, and I don't know your thoughts about this, but I've seen some people, we've talked with some companies about the possibility of conducting their surveys, and they have no history of surveys within the organization for 3 or 4 years. And they're waiting for the right time. Obviously budget is sometimes a concern, but there are inexpensive ways to get some employee feedback. But I think they're afraid of what the answers could be. And so they're afraid to ask the questions. And it's been such a long time that, I do think we can get caught up in, well, we have to wait for all these circumstances to be in place before we ask the survey. But sometimes the survey will help make sure that all the other things you're working on are actually the right things, because we've talked about, identifying problems and opportunities on the surveys, which certainly they will, But you'll also find on surveys that some things are rated more highly than you thought, or some things are less of a concern, less of a priority. We've had companies, sometimes we ask about like which benefits are most important to the employees, or what's most important to them at work. And the responses are surprising to the leaders. And here they've been investing all this money, time, resources over here, but it's here where they need it. So sometimes you want to ask that question sooner rather than later. If they say, well, we have to get this in place first and this in place and this in place, then they're kind of waiting for the compliments for those things, but they may not even be the right things. Yeah. Have you seen that?
Yes. It's funny how sometimes, like when you've analyzed the results as a consultant and you present it to the leadership team, sometimes they can say, oh yeah, we know, like we did that, that's great. Sometimes they can be like, well, they are just an ungrateful bunch, are they? Like, why are they not thankful for all the things we do for them? And sometimes it hasn't reached all of the locations, all of the departments. Sometimes something was implemented, but it wasn't communicated well, or wasn't relevant for a particular group. But I think this is really bringing up a more important overall point about the sort of organizational culture that businesses would want to aim for. It's a culture of open and honest communication and feedback. Mm-hmm. In fact, in my experience, the question, like the survey item saying that we have an open and honest communication in our company is very closely linked to overall employee engagement and likelihood of retention and belief in the company vision and values, and in the senior leadership's ability to lead. That's incredibly important. And the fact that a company is running an employee survey and is committed to it and is committed to taking action based on that is an important step and an indication that there is that culture of feedback, of openness and cooperation that is really a distinguishing feature of some of the most top performing businesses that are not just performing exceptionally well, but that also have employees that actually enjoy doing what they do and to look forward to Mondays perhaps, or they really love what they do and they are promoters for their business, which is what employee engagement is all about. It's about people who really want to believing in what they're doing and wanting to bring their best effort, not just for the paycheck, but because they really love their work.
Mm-hmm. I love reading those types of comments on surveys too. As much as you want to hear the opportunities and look for themes there, it is really rewarding to see how many employers or individual locations, managers, regions, things like that of people who do love their work. And that's exciting and empowering for the rest of us, right?
It really is. I can only agree with you, Kristen. Like reading the positive comments, sometimes it can be our job to understand what are some of the challenges and really dig deep to understand that. But it's an incredibly pleasant experience to just see those positive comments when a business is really doing well and doing some of the right things. Kristen, it's been such a pleasure to have this conversation with you. Always great to hear about your philosophy and your perspective when it comes to gathering employee feedback and to what companies can do in this space. How can our listeners get in touch with you?
Thank you. Thanks for the conversation. It is fun, as you mentioned. My email is on the screen here. That's a great way. And I'm very open also to any connections on LinkedIn. And that's a great way to reach out. I've really enjoyed having more conversations via Zoom and meeting people and just getting to know people, seeing if there might be a way to work together, or just sharing some ideas, which can be really helpful. We partner with organizations as well as with other service providers in a variety of ways. And, anything that has a common goal of making work better and listening to people, I'm happy to have that conversation and really encourage it.
Thank you, Kristen. And as for me, my contact details are also on the screen. You can feel free to connect with me over LinkedIn or send me a message on pavel@businesspurposecoaching.com. Thank you, everyone, to listening today. And Kristen, thank you for this conversation.
Thank you, Pavel. It was a lot of fun. I appreciate it.